Recording. Welcome everyone to Product Council today. I'm aware a lot of people watch the recording, so we'll go ahead even though we're perhaps not for it today. Today, we're going to talk about reducing the cost of cross-border payments. Julie Guetta has been working as part of Project Concorde, an initiative led in collaboration with EPA Asia, and I'll let her tell you all about it. So I'll just hand straight over to Julie now. Julie?
Thanks, Paul, for this introduction, and thanks for joining the call. So I'll just share my screen. And perhaps while I do that, we also have Monica from EPA on the call. Perhaps, Monica, could you introduce what EPA does before we dive into the details of Project Concorde?
Absolutely. So I'm Monica Jasuja. I'm the Chief Expansion and Innovation Officer of Emerging Payments Association Asia. We're a peak association for payment providers all across APAC. We have members such as Mojaluk, PayPal, MasterCard, Swift, and of course, smaller payment players. We work not only to help thought leadership discussions, but also policy advocacy and to foster a community which really not just tries to look at problems and foretell what the future of payments is likely to be, but we have a number of working groups, and thanks to Julie and Mojaluk for leading one of our working groups on cross-border payments. But we have 7 more of these, which actually help further the industry along by actually providing practical recommendations and actions, which we come together as a community. Some of these working groups have been running for the last many years, and some of them have started this year. So thank you again for the opportunity, and thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Monica, for introducing yourself and the EPA. Sorry, I'm just gonna do a bit of logistic because some people just tipping me they don't have the link. So give me 1 second, I'll share. All right, sorry about that. So you should be able to share to see the link. Okay, so before, okay, my laptop is not, here we go. So today we basically, Monica and I are going to summarize our day of work with EPA members on discussing cross-border payment and more particularly like how we could reduce the cost. The idea is really to have a brainstorming session, particularly on the last part of the presentation. I'll try to monitor the chat during the presentation, and obviously, please, Monica, feel free to interrupt me at any time when you want to add any details. I guess let's start with the beginning and an introduction of why we started to look at this, right? I don't think we're the only group in the industry looking at this. So we know that it's a priority within the industry to improve cross-border payment and particularly the cost of it. And when we look at basically the KPIs that were set by FSBs, and where we at when we looked at these KPIs, we are far away from the target being set on cost. And so what we decided to do is looking at how we could implement some practical ways to reduce the cost of cross-border payment. And so when we actually look at the topic, it's like an onion that needs to be peeled. I'm not sure actually if this, hopefully this translates in English and it's not only a French phrase. But there are many layers that are included in the processing of the cross-border transaction and impact the cost. And to be fair, like when we look at smaller DFSPs who tend to serve part of the market that process small amount transactions, this is where this cost is basically becoming a problem. And it's become a problem because then it become also like a barrier to entry. And because of that, there are basically underserved communities that don't have access to cross-border payment. And I think now we should have the COMESA, the RPP team on the call as well. This is also a challenge that they are trying to address. So what was the workstream vision, right? So basically, like our purpose was to create a future where cross-border payments are affordable, inclusive, and accessible. And that's like what we decided to look at is like looking at the component of cross-border payment. Majority of it, like, the infrastructure. And by infrastructure, we obviously mean like the technology, but also the scheme rules and the regulation that underpins the processes of cross-border payment, how we could significantly reduce cost. To be fair, like across the market, there is already a lot of white papers and documentation, information that explain that describe very well the problem statement, right? And why the cost of cross-border payment is quite high. The purpose of this workstream was to be extremely pragmatic and actually produce something that could be leveraged by any payment practitioner operating in the cross-border space. Whether it is a regulator, a hub operator, or a DFSP or financial institution offering cross-border services or aiming to offer cross-border services. So we decided that actually the way we would capture the work of the work stream will be by producing what we call a toolkit. So it won't be like, only a white paper describing what the problem are, but trying to also suggest some solutions on how the cost could be reduced. And please, when I say only produce a white paper, like, short of capturing the the problem statement, obviously this is not by I would say eliminating any value of this work. I think it's quite important that, like, the industry gather on what are the problems we're trying to address so that we are clear on what we are trying to achieve. And to be fair, like when we looked at this, we also like leverage the expertise of the work stream, and some members of the work stream are also engaged in other working groups. So that was also quite very useful for us to produce the toolkit. So as I mentioned, the expectation is like, for this work stream to conclude this first phase by releasing a toolkit. So the purpose of the toolkit is really to include practical recommendation for cost optimization. And if you're wondering what does a TCP WG mean, it's basically the name of the project is Project Concorde, the Concorde project workstream. So that's what the acronym means. And the idea is, like I said, is really to provide some practical recommendation for cost optimization. And I mentioned it before, the toolkit is targeted to any payments practitioner involved in cross-border payment implementation and strategic decision-making as well. Because you'll see some of the recommendations that we're doing like are really for decision makers to consider and hopefully like advocates for them. What was our methodology, right? So first, actually, we started to understand like what are the costs impacting the total fees charged to a customer on cross-border payments. Because the work stream has various profiles and various organizations doing different things, it was very interesting at first to see what the definition of a cross-border payment was for every single member of the work stream. So first, when we say focusing on specific means of payment, we excluded card payment, we decided to focus on account-to-account payment. And within even account-to-account payment, we noticed that there was variances of this. Namely, like you could have bilateral relationship in place. You could have cross-border payment being executed through a multilateral platform. You could have closed-loop systems such as PayPal's or Ant providing a wallet structure, and you could have also a correspondent banking relationship. And obviously, we thought that when it comes to identifying the cost, a good portion of the cost will remain true regardless of how the payment is processed, but a small portion of the cost will vary. So we sort of decided that it would be the 80-20 rules, and 80% of the cost will be able to identify will probably applied regardless of the method of payment within the scope identified, and then we decided to try to find solution mainly for this 80%. So the core component across the various type of cross-border payment in account to account and the types that I just mentioned right now. Once we identify all the costs, actually there were many costs, and I'll show you in a minute how it looked like at the beginning. We decided to categorize this cost. And the idea was trying sort of a compromise between focusing on each single category, and it would take too long, and we would have a very thick book of recommendation versus trying to boil the ocean. And so having no categorization whatsoever and trying to do too much. So we'll show you as well the categorization of how we decided to classify all the costs so that we could think of very practical solution to try to reduce this cost. And when we did actually the cost categorization, we also work on creating an impact effort matrix. And I'll show you the matrix as well. And so the idea of the matrix was to understand okay, if I do this, it will have a 10x impact, or it will have a 5x impact or a 1x impact. So that's also why we leverage this framework. And then, as I mentioned, the toolkit is meant to be absolutely practical and pragmatic. So then we identify practical solutions, and then we reduce this practical solution to 10 recommendations effectively. So today I'm going to show you all of the various documents, but on cost identification and cost categorization, I'm probably going to go quite quickly because I want us to focus on practical solution. And the purpose of today's meeting is basically to gather your feedback on the practical solution. So please, when we reach this part, feel free to unmute yourself. And if we have no participation, I may pick on a few names. So on the cost identification, so I'm going to stop sharing for a minute, and I will share Canvas so that you can see. I'm going to zoom as well. I'm going to reshare my screen. Here we go. Sorry, I'm on my trackpad and it's not doing what it's meant to do. Here we go. I go like this. Okay, so hopefully you should be able to see my screen and it should be big enough so that everybody can read as well. Please unmute yourself to say no if it's not the case.
Seems plenty big enough to me, Julie.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so what we basically did is and why we use Canvas is we started sort of from scratch. So we basically the work stream is a group of payment experts, but from very various backgrounds. So within the work group, you have technology provider, you have FX provider, you have infrastructure provider, you have app operator, very various profile like that. I'm sure I'm missing a few, but please, Monica, feel free to jump in if you feel I'm missing a few key profiles. And so what we did is like we think of what could be all the costs possible when I want to start from scratch and I want to implement cross-border services. And so that's why, like when we started like for example, you need to have you have capital expenditure. Obviously, you have cost on fraud, audit, sanction, regulation, technical equipment, security. You have cost of project because you will need to do some testing. You will need to have project manager and so on. You have cost of liquidity, particularly like, depending on the payment mean for cross-border payment, from multilateral platform, from bilateral, you will have this as well. You will have routing cost of selecting this role, and also if you are the FSP and like I said, we took the view of understanding the cost from the point of view of I'm a financial institution and I want to launch cross-border payment to an end user, which could be merchant or person as well. So I will have cost of settlement, I will have cost of processes such as reconciliation or verification of pay, and I will have cost of failure because I will need to manage this failure. So you see, like, and I'm gonna dezoom a bit. So you see, like, this is all the cost we identify overall, right? And to be fair, some of them we grouped under a single ticket. And then when we've done this grouping, we decided to exclude some of the cost and say this cost will be out of scope. And as you can see here, this will mainly be within the cost of capital expenditure and so on, right? And the cost in green, we decided that we would retain this cost for this analysis. And then I should say as well, right? We work on various categorizations. So when I zoomed in the dashboard, I went through effectively the subcategorization, but we also add bigger categorization as well around risk management, footprint in a new market, legal cost, compliance cost, IT, and we add a category what we call the money movement cost as well. It helped us having this big bucket to some extent. And like I said, like the idea was, okay, how do we convey the message in an easily way as much as possible? And if it's too granular, we notice that it doesn't help. And if it's too generic, it doesn't as well. So that's why we work on categorization, and it helps us to have this discussion. And then once we've done this, of identifying like all these costs that you see here, and I will zoom in a bit. I'm always struggling to move on Canvas for some reason with my trackpad. Once we have like basically all these costs and categorize them. At first, like I said, there was no category, right? It's an exercise that we've done within the workstream to try to group them together. We created the impact effort matrix. So I'm going to stop sharing again, and we go on my PowerPoint to show you. Okay, you should be able to see PowerPoint again. We basically work on the category and on the sub-level category, and we basically created this impact effort analysis. So basically what we were looking at is, okay, so if we address one cost category, what would be the impact? Here, obviously being high and here being low. And if we basically try to target this issue, how much issue, how big the effort will be, right? And when we looked at the effort, we also looked at short of what was in the control of an institution, versus what was not in the control of an institution and what would require influential power. Sorry, just give me one sec. I think a bird is trying to enter my office, so I'm just going to close the window to be on the safe side. One second, sorry about.
No problem, Julie. I think we'd all agree that this impact effort matrix is very interesting, potentially very valuable in shaping strategy. Julie, you're back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul, for your comment, and sorry for the small interruption. And so, as you can see, like basically here, this with what we were ideally looking for is something that would have like high impact and low effort. So something and high impact, low effort. So effectively something around this line. But guess what? There is no silver bullet to address this issue, so that's probably why all the industry is looking at this, and it's taking a lot of time to resolve, right? To resolve and bring some practical solution. Because when we did actually the impact effort matrix, we've noticed that most of the category we are looking at would have high impact, but they would require high effort as well. There was just like one thing that we thought. Would then require like low effort. It was cost of technical equipment. I see, Jonathan, you have your hands up. I'll give you the floor in one second. I finish to comment on this, and then I'll give you the floor. On this one, why we basically like decided it was low impact and low effort as well, potentially. It's because a lot of work has been done, right, over the last few years around how the infrastructure should be, whether it should be in the cloud, whether it should be basically on-prem and so on. And so that's why like we decided that on this one, there is in fact like not much of recommendation to do anymore. And most of the time, if the choices are constrained, is because of regulation. And what we mean by technical equipment is more or less like the hardware. Okay, that could be dematerialized when you go to cloud, but this layer that is required to process cross-border payments. When it comes to the applications that go on top of this infrastructure, so the hardware infrastructure that could be seated in the cloud, the cost is included in the various categories. So for example, cost of fraud will obviously involve FRMS cost, right? Cost of processing and routing will include like, a cost of payment engine or core banking system overall. Jonathan, yeah, please.
All right. No, thank you very much. So my question is on the cost of processing and routing. So if I see like issues to do with, let's say, settlement, cost of settlement and liquidity, cost
Yeah.
of FX. So I'm trying to figure out what is exactly in the processing, because probably
Yeah.
settlement will be part of the process, FX will be part of the process. What is it in the processing per se and routing? I
Yeah,
wanted
no
a
problem at
deeper
all.
clarification. Yes, thank
Thank
you.
thank you for your question. So let me give you like a definition of each category as well. So cost of technical equipment I just covered, cost of processing and routing. So this is basically all the equipment required for a DFSP to connect to a network. So that goes from I need a payment engine, I need a core banking system to I need to maintain correspondent banking relationship, or I need to basically pay network fee to have access to a network. And I also need to integrate this to this network. So I need to somehow comply to the scheme rules, and I also probably need to do some technical integration. Then on cost of fraud, I think this one speaks more or less for itself. So it's how do I manage all the fraud prevention from basically like, trying to identify mule account, authorized push payment, which are fraudulent, social engineering, and to on the other side of the spectrum, like AML, sanction screening, and so on. So that would go into cost of fraud. Cost of failure is basically like, what does it cost me if the cross-border payment is not successfully completed? So in there is like, the cost of basically reputation. And we also thought that this notion of serving well your customer is very important, particularly in the cross-border space, because what you have, in many corridors, it's a highly competitive market, and it's becoming even more so as now, like, you have a next generation type of solutions such as stablecoin-based network who are also trying to address certain corridor. Cost of settlement and liquidity, so that would be really much like, related to the movement of money between two financial transactional bank. So basically, and being an RTGS participant as well. So how much does it cost? What is the risk of default? Because this risk is typically priced. What is the opportunity cost by having like, a pre-funding requirement and so on. Cost of regulatory compliance. So in this category, we purposely decided to exclude cost of fraud and create a category on its own. But typically, you would have more and more now, like some regulatory demand linked to fraud management. But because again, like we wanted to be able to find a way to address, come up with a pragmatic solution, we decided to decouple the two. So in the cost of regulatory compliance, you'll have like, the cost of reporting to the jurisdictional regulators. You'll have the cost of like, complying to currency conversion measure and so on. And on the cost of FX, that's purely like, having access to the liquidity and obviously like being in a position where you have an exchange rate at 10 to be able to execute this transfer, which typically involve like, two, even more sometimes like currencies, particularly like, in some corridor when USD is used as a pivot currency. So yeah, I hope it answers your question. Is there any other question on the cost categorization?
Yeah, you've answered my question. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I'll take silence and I don't see any other. Let me see if there are comments in the chat. Nothing. Okay, perfect.
I think it would reflect my perception as well. So yeah, I think it's a good categorization. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And so I think like as you can see, so here we sort of have blocks, and perhaps like as I explain the slide, I can see that actually I should do more something like this. Sorry about that. It's I can see it clearly in my head, but I can see that it's not necessarily really reflecting on the slide. So I do more like this. Okay, which box is not positioned where it is by randomly, right? And actually, its position matter. Why I put this box a bit more upright. So if you look at it like short of horizontally, and perhaps I can do like this, you'll have it can be imagined like this, right? Where here it is short of low impact, medium impact, and high impact. And here it is more or less like all of this. Here, this one is in the center because it's medium effort. So here it's low effort, medium effort, and then we become in this bucket of category as high effort, right? So yeah, I move this box a bit so that like, this row could appear more straightforwardly. And then when we look at effectively all these boxes, so the impact between like, cost of technical equipment, I've said it before, we think that the impact is low now because a lot of work have already been completed in this space. And then here, medium impact, and here it's basically like high impact. And in fact, for the cost of fraud, to be fair, like we debated a lot between medium and high. So this actually, I should put this box slightly higher. Okay. I know it stays. I didn't expect this. That's okay. And so here, okay, so before we go into practical solution, is there any challenge that you guys would like to voice on the position of the boxes? And please, Monica, if I've forgotten something, please feel free to interrupt. I see there is a question from Paul on the chat. Cost of fraud, does this include the cost of fraud countermeasure? Yeah. It's a fraud prevention cost, right? In fact, thank you for this. We should call it cost prevention, cost of fraud prevention instead of cost of fraud.
It's a mix of the two, isn't it? So
we are not trying to raise posters. So good. Thank you for this.
100% prevention. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Any other, like, let me see, is there any other, like, immediate comment on the impact effort matrix? Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing for a bit, and then I'll show you how we did it and how we summarize this as well. So once we discuss all these costs, we categorize those costs and we put them on the matrix. We then spend some time understanding, okay, like how now do we solve the issue? And so what we did is, and I will dezoom a bit. So here, like, it was our second matrix that we basically short-term work on. So here you have the various category of the cost, and these are the boxes that are displayed on the matrix. We again, like, definition is always so core. So we spent some time on discussing, like, what does it include? And we try as much as we could to minimize the number of overlap, but because at the end of the day, it's an end-to-end process and all of this, like, are kind of intertwined. Sometimes it was a bit hard, but we try our best to basically, like, explain, okay, what does each category contain and how can we minimize the overlap. And that's why, for example, just to give you some perhaps anecdote about the work, right? At first, actually, processing and routing were separate, but we decided to gather them because there was too many overlap. Then we debated a lot on the placement of each box, and we documented on why we decided to put the box where they are now. What does this include? I already mentioned. And then we basically each time, like, explain a bit more in detail, like what the problem was. And then we come with different solutions. And then we decided to sort of select a few subsets of the solution to make final recommendation. And even from this final recommendation, we process that even more so that now we have the 10 practical solutions to reduce the cost of cross-border payment. So I'll share with you this practical solution, and this is the moment where I expect hopefully, like, lots of comments and feedback and challenges on this. Because again, like, we want to make sure that the toolkit is as usable as possible. And so any feedback is a good feedback for us to make it more practical. So I'm just gonna reshare my PowerPoint again. Okay. Okay, so here we basically order the practical solution by effort required, right? And so if you remember the impact matrix, the first one was cost of processing and routing, and the last one was cost of FX. So I'm just going to repeat it. I know the equipment is not mentioned here. It's because, like I said, a lot have been done already, and so we didn't feel like there was any more practical solution to mention. So that's why these have been intentionally excluded, because yeah, we think a lot have been done already. So on the first one, on cost of processing and routing, basically, the first one is align message format and required data field across corridor. So ISO, we thought that ISO was a good first step, and the implementation of ISO across the industry was great. But what we've noticed is like there is inconsistent use of the field. And how basically like some information are being mapped into messages. And then from basically payment practitioner level of an institution that will give a solution that create extra complexity to integrate into network. And for the end user perspective, that create uneven experiences depending on the corridor. And so for basically people that are across several border and cover markets that are sort of neighbors to one another. And it doesn't mean big corporate, it could be a small SME right at the border serving people from various countries, or for a person that needs to make a cross-border payment. It makes as well the experience very inconsistent. So you don't know what to expect, and it doesn't make this a great customer experience. And so as a result, what we notice is when short of a financial service provider has abstract this and provided a consistent solution across various corridors, they tend to be more used as an overall solution. And we discussed in one of the workstream meetings the solution offered by the wallet in Asia. So these are consistent across various jurisdictions. And we discuss also, for example, the example offered by Wise. This solution are obviously closed looped, and so the idea is trying to create open loop. So how do we improve it, right? And leverage insight from parties that are already operating in the field. So that was the first basically practical solution. And the second solution was leverage share platform wherever possible. Obviously, I think we're within the module community, right? So I don't think I need to comment too much on this. I do feel, to be fair, leveraging regional platform and so on have been something that I've been advocating within the community for quite some time. What we said as well, and it was interesting, is in some corridors, it may not make sense to use regional platform. And so what we also said is actually that should be short of the decision should be made based on a detailed analysis. Then on cost of failure, what basically we said, and that was interesting because it was across many different parties, the importance of pre-validation these days to reduce failure rates up front and actually prevent challenges before they have the chance to actually materialize and have the money debited. And also, it would give the chance for correction to be done before any movement of money. Again, I think I'm within the module community here, so I do believe we all believe in the value of pre-validation. So I move quickly to the other point, which was create some end-to-end transaction tracking, status visibility, and standard dispute management aligned with agreed SLA. And this is again around creating more transparency and making sure that at any point in time as a customer, I know where my transaction is, why it could be stopped, and I have access to this information at my fingers, right? And for standardized dispute management, what we notice as well is this procedure varies to a great degree from one corridor to another. And as a result of this is when you implement, so if we look at, for example, hub operator level, when you implement a DILAT, this creates some complexity and it prevents you to actually standardize your connection. So it makes the bilateral implementation more complicated, more time consuming, and therefore, the fees that will be charged to the customer will be higher because obviously you want to recover on your infrastructure and have a sustainable business model. And the last point was around SLA. So whether it's SLA on the transaction, whether it's effectively SLA around the dispute management per se, all of these are not standardized at all. And so it creates a very inconsistent experience for the customer in the cross-border space, depending on which corridor they are sending payment to. And so that's something that we thought would be very good to address because it will have sort of benefits on all the parties involved in the chain, namely hub operator, namely DFSP, namely customer as well. This one, we appreciate that coming up with global standard on this may not be easy. And it will definitely take time, but we thought that starting with region and leveraging some, for example, what you have in Asia is Asian. What you have in Africa is also a commercial zone such as COMESA, or you have EAC, you have SADC. So leveraging this to already implement some regional standard will help. And then kind of from regional standard have obviously a global discussion and perhaps in groups such as CPMI group, which EPA is a member as well, focusing on cross-border payment. Next one was on cost of fraud. So we definitely agree that one of the problem and challenge and why basically today, I should say cost of fraud prevention. Why fraud prevention is difficult today, it's because often there is no facilities to do data sharing. And when we say data sharing, we don't necessarily mean between two financial institutions or two banks. We mean basically across all the parties involved in the fact that the fraud happened to some extent, right? The orchestration of the fraud overall. So we know that, for example, Facebook is often used and to have a love money transfer and so on. So we thought that being in a position where data could be shared between all across the party would make sense. Obviously, having some measure in place around what type of data can be shared, and how do we do that, respecting the regulation. But we also thought that in some jurisdiction, regulation should evolve. Automation and common infrastructure component, potentially leveraging tools like AI, implementing centralized registry. And by common infrastructure component, obviously, we also meant a FRMS tool. I see Justice is in the call as well. So I think leveraging a common FRMS platform has always also been a message within the community for quite some time. And to be fair, Malaysia is a member of the work stream, and so they have implemented the fraud portal across all the payment while leveraging FNM. And I mean, it's also known within the community because they talk to I know Azina was part of a panel on this in one of our previous convening. Cost of regulatory compliance. So here, this is where how we can reduce the cost of data reporting and the cost of complying to some regulations that, again, are not related necessarily to fraud prevention. So here we mentioned exploring machine readable or coded regulation to reduce the compliance burden. I think if you were present in the Product Council where Paul presented the long-term roadmap as well, he explained quite intensively on what does that mean and what are the tools required for this, what are the existing solutions. So in the interest of time, I moved to recommendation 7. So here we thought that also harmonize what are the data requirements and policy across corridors. in order to reduce duplication of effort and also translation tool, right? It's a bit the same, right? If everybody align on definition, speaks the same language, use ISO the same way, it will be easier to effectively comply and making sure that potentially one jurisdiction can check all the compliance requirement without necessarily always rechecking everything when the payments arrive in the new jurisdiction. So how do we harmonize this and do more data sharing around the processing as well? And this we thought that pushing for more global dialogue was definitely required. Cost of settlement and liquidity. So here we thought, what about in exploring next generation rails to improve settlement speed? And to be fair, Passio was mentioned within the workstream as well, not for me, but from other members of the workstream as a solution to explore. And we also discussed on how AI could be used for managing liquidity more efficiently and reduce your liquidity opportunity cost. And then on cost of FX, obviously, why we classify it as high effort, it's because there are hygienic factors in the cost of FX, which are not necessarily related to payment processing per se. And what we notice is often the cost of FX is high because there are structural challenges within the market. And so, for example, the fact that there is free capital of flow is an influence to have a market in the first place. As payment practitioner, we didn't really feel that there was something that we could do related to this a lot. Because it's beyond our remit, right? And we looked at what we could do as payment practitioner to influence the cost of FX. One of the things that we said is, okay, when we look at the processes, how can we aggregate demand across a jurisdiction? How can we improve price discovery and provide more transparency? And how potentially, we could introduce netting, but netting within a window that makes sense to increase liquidity efficiency. And I think as an example, I know COMESA DRPP is implementing some of this because, for example, there is only the settlement is done in local currency, so that's limit your need for FX. If you look at PAPS, this is also solutions they've been trying to implement. When it comes to improving price discovery, it's offering transparency to the end customer. Also something that COMESA DRPP is doing. And on netting to increase liquidity efficiency, this really depends on the network and the instruments that are being used. But I know FNA as well released some paper regarding this. And on 10, this was the part where, how when we discuss it within the work stream on how can we influence some of the things that are beyond our remit, actually, we decided to give as a practical recommendation to advocate for drastic policy change, particularly on two things. One is who can be an FX provider, because today it's limited to in most jurisdiction to banks, and then how potentially currency controls can be influenced, particularly in market where there is extremely high currency control, leading to very low supply of liquidity as a result of this. So if you look at 9 and 10, as you can see, what we were trying to do is give practical recommendation on how to improve both the demand side and the supply side. Okay, I spoke a lot and we have only 6 minutes left. So I stop now and I'll take questions and comments. Monica, first of all, is there anything that you would like to add?
No, you've covered everything very well. Thank you, Julie.
Okay, great. Sorry, I stopped sharing by mistake. I will reshare.
Thank you, Julie. I think that was very interesting. I wondered if you could just, for us, recap on next steps, what you're planning to do with all of this.
Sure. So we are right now in the process of basically writing the toolkit. So the toolkit would be a white paper. And so this white paper will be officially launched during EPA Connect, and it will be publicly available after the launch of the white paper. But that will be the next step, effectively, like summarizing a year of work, what I summarize in an hour now into a more comprehensive document. And so that's why, like, we were very keen as we are about to finalize the white paper. We are very keen to present this to the community and see if you have any specific feedback or question, because it would increase the quality of the white paper. So that's why I'm really keen to hear any feedbacks that you may have or questions that you may have. Obviously, on the definition and so on, and the position of each boxes, the white paper is much more comprehensive in the presentation that I just gave you, but minding that the presentation is on 1 hour.
Can you share this presentation later today? A PDF of it, anyway. Would that be
the presentation, this one? Yes.
yeah. And possibly a snapshot of the Canva, because I think that's really important information in there. A read access, at least. Possibly.
Yeah, Monica, like for the Canva, do you think it will be possible as well?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you. And I'd encourage everyone to deep dive into the Canva. There's a lot of information there, and review comments would be very welcome. Are there any other questions before we close? Okay.
No questions. Just thank you, Julie. This was a great talk. Thank you.
Yeah, it was a very interesting presentation. Thank you. Thank you all.
No problem.
Okay, on that note, then, I think we will close for today. Perfect timing, Julie. You managed it with less than 3 minutes left. So perfectly sized. So thank you, everyone, and see you all again soon. And just a final note, I will be publishing the recording later today. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.